Welcome to Off Panel.
Yo everybody, welcome to Off Panel. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is a return visitor to the show, as well as the editor of the whole slew of comics like Deadly Class and Southern Bastards, and the co-writer of the upcoming Shirtless Bear Fighter, and writer of Scales and Scoundrels, all of which are at Image Comics. It's Sebastian Girner. Thanks for coming on, Sebastian.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. I'm glad to be back.
So, I just got to start with saying this. That is a much longer intro than I had to do last time. You've definitely. It seems like you've been pretty busy. At least, I mean, you're a writer now. That's new, right?
Yay! I upgraded. Level up, writer achieved. Yeah, it's I think actually last time you had to read like a bunch of comics that I was editing, just like to kind of fill out the scope. I think like you edit 5 comics that's just bundles together.
Mm-hmm.
That's like equal 1 comic you write. So now I have a writing credit on 2 comics, so you don't have to read quite as many. But yeah, man, it's been a busy couple of years. I'm glad I'm still here for you to have me on again. And in comics, that is not it's not a given. I think.
No, absolutely, and it is also interesting to see like the kind of transition for roles and everything. Actually, that's one thing I wasn't really sure because we didn't talk about it before. You came into comics as an assistant editor at Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
You've moved on to editing a bunch of creator-owned books, many of which I love. But to my knowledge, you've never written or co-written anything before. Was writing comics rather than just editing always part of your master plan, or is it just something that kind of grew over the years and you just wanted to kind of push beyond, quote unquote, just being an editor?
Yeah. If there had been a master plan, even then I wouldn't know if writing had been a part of it. I stumbled into editing pretty backwards, where it's the most boring story, and I've had to tell it several times in interviews now because we've been doing a bunch of interviews for Shirtless Bear Fighter, me, my co-creator Jody LaHoop, and I. And you know, obviously, people are always like, "How'd you get started in the industry? How'd you break in?" And I was like, "I applied for a job at Marvel, and they gave me one,"
Right.
which is so square. It's like the lamest thing ever.
I feel like everybody has this idea that breaking into comics is some grandiose thing that people could actually emulate, but mostly it's just like I applied and it kind of happened.
It's either breaking in is either just like everyone has a singular hero's journey, like there's nothing to replicate other
Right.
than a base level of passion, talent, but even not that sometimes, and or passion. Like it's just sometimes it just happens.
Mm-hmm.
Very very often it's just kind of like if you're not breaking in, it means you're pushing at this one shutter that's just closed, but you could be looking at other. There might be a week like water finds its level or something like that. No, that's the wrong analogy. What I'm thinking of. The path of least resistance.
Sure.
And there are ways to break in, be they applying for a job and getting one because the stars were just so aligned as me. And then once you're in, that's when the work starts. Because once you're in doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want. Like it took me, 10 years almost now. Next year it'll be 10 years of working my way into a position where I can actually look around and be like, I'm actually doing exactly what I want to be doing,
Mm-hmm.
which is both editing books with other creators and helping different teams fulfill their visions and learning from them and through them, but also having projects that I can fulfill my own kind of wishes and just kind of experiment with writing and tell stories that come from me as opposed to like me being a lens or a catalyst and helping other people do that. So in terms of breaking in, that is always a very interesting conversation for me because I definitely know about people who've had really exciting kind of. You should actually talk to Jody LaHoop, my co-writer on Shirtless Bear Fighter, who was also an assistant editor at Marvel. That's how we met, and we were roommates for many years. And he's got quite a story. Like he did like a global trek to get to Marvel. Which of course informs then how he, saw that job at Marvel as opposed to me, who was just kind of like, I'm here, guys, I'm going to edit comics. But writing my own comics or just writing something didn't happen and didn't start to kind of crystallize in my mind until after I left Marvel. almost about 5 years ago, when I'd like seen the process. I edited a ton of stuff, worked with really great writers, worked with up and comers as well, kind of guys who would write a one shot or something here or there, and just kind of like learned about the craft and learn the ins and outs. And I was like, I could probably do this. And because when I left Marvel, I was pretty sure I wasn't going to work in comics anymore, just because I had just left Marvel.
Where do you go from there?
Exactly. Like, you're kind of institutionalized to be like, well, that was kind of the top of the mountain, and it didn't feel right, for whatever reason. So, maybe I'll try something else. But I started writing a couple of small things. I started jotting down some ideas, and then I started breaking them down, almost just kind of like to keep busy, because I was doing day jobs and I was, making rent somehow, but you still have it in the blood. Like you're just, it's going from like, lifting 300 to just not working out at all or something. Like I'm not a workout dude at all. I don't know if that's like insane.
I feel like that's totally legit. I mean, it going hardcore from anything or doing anything to doing basically nothing. Yeah, it's totally understandable. So anyways, continue. So
I wrote a bunch of small things. I wrote a samurai short story. I wrote like a really ridiculous sci-fi thing, like an 8-pager that someone I just saw a comic called Revenger.
Oh yeah. Charles Forsman.
Yeah, exactly, which is really great. And I was like, damn it, stole my title from a stupid 8-pager. And I actually wrote 5 issues of a thing that I'm not going to talk about because I'm hoping it'll still happen. Mm-hmm. But at that point, when I was kind of like rooting around in this, and I did my first like 2 paid writing gigs, which was really exciting. I wrote for Viz Comics. There's an animated cartoon called Monsuno, which I had not heard about at the time, but I was reached out to by an editor called Joel Enos, who was very nice and was like, hey, we're doing a couple of these comics, and would you like to pitch one? And I was like, sure. And I pitched an idea, and I thought I was pitching for like an 8-pager or like a maybe 8/16, something like that, short. And he was like, hey, they really love your idea. We're going to give you like 50 pages, full color. I was like, whoa, that's crazy for a first gig. I didn't say that, but that's what I thought. He was like, yeah, can you get the script in like a week? And I was like, absolutely. You got it, boss. So my first writing credit was written under like insane. I was just like, I've never written a thing myself. I pitched these people on something. They totally bought it. And I wrote. I like to think I wrote the crap out of it. It's probably not. I hope it'll be something. Hopefully, if my writing career goes well, people can go back to it, and look upon it. And but it turned out actually it was really fun. It's still one of my favorite things I've ever written, just because it came at a time when I really needed to do something like that. I really wanted to have a part of me like put on paper, put out there. And honestly, also doing a job I had zero confidence that I could do, and just said yes because I had worked with enough freelancers who were just like, just always say yes. Just like, if it takes longer, it takes longer. You're fine. I was just like, you know what? I'm going to give this a shot. Also, as someone who had edited a lot of writers, having never written something myself was obviously something I wanted to explore, like learn what life is like on the other side of the track.
That is one hell of a trial by fire. Like that's slightly more than 7 pages a day. That's well done, you.
It was 10 pages a day, I think, and then like a day of editing, which I insisted I give myself. But it worked out, and the comic came out, and I continue to get work to this day. So it wasn't the end of the world. But honestly, it was like kind of, thinking that like I can only stretch this far, but actually I could stretch way further. That gave me a lot of confidence. Even to just not doubt myself, because I'm like, I can probably do something like that again. But at that point, I got a call from Rick Remender, and he was like, "Hey, I'm gonna do a book at Image with Matteo Scalera. It's called Black Science." And we'd had a great rapport, and we talked all about this, in the last podcast. But that's kind of when the editing bell started ringing again. And I very quickly got roped up in that.
I had no idea that was taking place before you even started pairing up with Remender with all of his stuff.
Oh yeah, this all happened in like I also did a this is all in a very very short amount of time.
That's crazy.
It's I was still working at a travel magazine as a fact checker. I had been reached out to by Chris Robinson, who was an intern during my time at Marvel, who's now actually an assistant editor, and actually an editor. I think he's been there longer than I have. He is an editor at Marvel now, and he reached out to me, and he was doing a Kickstarter anthology called Fearless Future. Mm-hmm. That actually I think was one of the things that netted him the job at Marvel, because he was reaching out to writers and artists, and I also actually think Declan Shalvey got his first writing credit on that book, which was really fun. He was great. He reached out to me. He was like, "Hey, it was an intern at Marvel for you, and I'm doing this Kickstarter." And I think that predates the Monsoon of the Viz gig. So I think that's actually my first paid writing gig.
Wow.
Which was an 8-page writing short with Kendall Good did the art, and I know the colorist's name too. I swore to myself I'd never forget the creators, the co-creators of the first thing I wrote, but it's really late and really hot, so I'm going to blame them. But I do remember their names. They're all fantastic. So yeah, and then out of the blue, I get a call from Rick, and I think a month or two later, I got a call from the Jasons, Jason Aaron, Jason Latour, and those two gigs, Southern Bastards, obviously, Black Science, Deadly Class on the other side, really cemented my footing, because all of a sudden I was editing 3 books at Image, mm-hmm. all of which were coming out in that period a couple of years ago when you saw a lot of creators that were previously kind of locked in between Marvel and DC going to Image and launching these titles. Mm-hmm. It's kind of crazy to think that that's already been almost 5 years, because at the time nobody was doing that.
Yeah.
And now having an Image book is kind of like, that's the thing you do Marvel and DC work or not, and you have people name a creator who doesn't really have a creator owned title going on right now. It's really really exciting to have built that space and have kind of been there when that bubble formed itself.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, like how it sounds like. Obviously, like going into like Shirtless Bear Fighter and going into Skills and Scoundrels, you're gonna be taking from all the stuff that you've kind of picked up from Rick and picked up from Jason or mm-hmm. Jason's, everybody. You've been kind of intimately involved in some capacity with everything that these comics have, every part of these books. How do you feel like that experience editing has impacted the way you approach your own writing? And beyond that, do you feel like that editing or your writing is going to kind of change how you approach editing to a certain degree? I know it's kind of 2 questions in one, but I'm cheating. Whatever. Do it, Sebastian.
No. It's really interesting. To answer the second one first.
Sure.
I'm going to answer the second one first. I'm taking pains to not let my writing affect my editing, because sure. I don't want those lines to be blurred. I want people who hire me as an editor to understand that I am there to help them tell their story, and that the advice or ideas or nudges I give aren't me trying to like
commandeer their idea.
Yeah, like I don't know. In German we have a word for it, but it's really long and it's like, do you know cuckoo birds?
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't lay their own eggs. They shove. They lay an egg into another bird's nest. Okay. And then that bird hatches, and the cuckoo bird baby is way bigger mm-hmm. Than regular songbird. So they actually push the indigenous eggs out of the nest.
Wow.
And this other bird mama is now left with kind of like, oh, I guess I'll just feed this thing that grew out of the egg. So that's always the picture that I kind of get when I feel like an editor is kind of trying to find some loose soil for their ideas.
Sure.
And because, editing is still a big part of what I do and I love it, I want to be sure that, writers and creators don't feel like I'm just trying to, like, hey, let's do it the Sebastian Girner way.
Right.
Although sometimes that, might be of benefit. So for the most part, I try to, now that I have, some projects to kind of lean myself into, I can feel free to follow those instincts. Whereas as an editor, you're kind of trying to find out which way the wind is blowing and then, sail through that, especially as a work for hire editor on creator-owned books, because as we've spoken about, the kind of balance of power is different there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in a position like I would be at Marvel or DC, where I'm kind of the gatekeeper to these characters' legacies that have been around for 100 years and will be around for 100 more. But I'm kind of the first set of eyes and the second brain to experience, a creator-owned story.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be giving feedback and I would be trying to punch holes into it, because if I can, so can the reader. And you kind of want to make things as airtight as you can. And then as long as I'm posing questions, may as well propose, some suggestions, some answers, and then basically giving the writer and the creators everything that I can give them to solidify, their story, their outline, their characters. And every now and again, I'll sneak an idea or something in there, but nothing gets in, without the creators feeling comfortable with it. And I try to make that very clear to new creators that I work with. There's like, if you're nervous about working with an editor in this capacity, I've kind of been there a couple of times now, so let me try and take away those fears as best I can.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of how editing affects my writing, I think I've learned a lot of just reading dozens and dozens of scripts from different writers, seeing how Rick does it, as opposed to, say, Kari Andrews, who does the Renato Jones book, who is an artist who writes scripts for himself, which is really interesting to me. It reminds me of like David Lapham, who's also like a great writer and a great artist, who would write all the dialogue first, because he's just like, I don't need to, I know what's going on the page, but then he would, write panel descriptions. So actually writing scales right now, I try to kind of give myself challenges where I try to write in almost like not aping different styles, but kind of like approaching it from a, this scene might need a little bit more of a hands-on approach. So I try to write, pretty, maybe more descriptive than I need be. And then, one script I've done like all like just channeled Garth Ennis as best I can. It's just lean, like one of Garth's favorite, I forget what it was, but it was a Judge Dredd, a panel, obviously. And if you look at the panel, it's Judge Dredd riding through this like crazy Mega City 1, hellscape, beautiful shading, all these mega towers in the back. And if you look at the script for that panel, it just says Dredd on bike, which is the greatest. I just love that story so much, because it was like, why would you write more? Just give the artist Dredd on bike,
right?
And they'll fill in the rest. So yeah, like I try to be influenced, obviously by the great writers and interesting writers, and also writers that I just like certain things. Like I just think certain things are interesting, how they approach a page or break down a panel. But I'm definitely also trying to find like me, like what I can bring to it, because if I'm going to be successful or known or as a writer, it's not going to be as, the guy who writes the fifth best version of a Garth Ennis script, or the guy who can like ape Alan Moore the most effectively,
or Rick Remender Light or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like I don't want that, nor for me nor for them. I don't think that that would be an homage that anyone wants paid to them.
Right.
I'm really trying to, especially with scales, because that's a longer project that I have a little bit more, kind of leeway with, is to kind of use that as a canvas on which to kind of figure out what I want to do, how I want to write, how do I want to approach art description, what relationship do I want to have with, this artist in particular, Gilad, but also how do I, want to write for potentially other artists? Like what other kind of story could I tell? Obviously, this is like a fantasy, comic and Gilad has a very, very unique style. So I am writing for him. And I can't imagine writing scales for any other artist, which is already weird. And I would never want, strangely, another artist to ever draw even like a single panel of that book, because Gilad is just so perfect. But yeah, it's really strange. I mean, I keep going back to like the early days of Marvel and DC when editors were writing the books,
right.
And then they just started hiring writers when it became too much. They were just too many books for Stan Lee to write. And now we have this, these pretty high walls between the disciplines, both not just between editor and writer, but between writer and artist, and colorist and artist. I know you just did a big podcast with Nathan Fairbairn, who wrote Lake of Fire,
Right.
which was a wonderful comic. And it's strange talking to artists and talking to people in different disciplines who are just like, wow, you're going to cross the train track. It's like it's doable, I mean, I'm not saying everything's going to be a success, and God knows if I'm going to be successful at what I'm doing. But I just kind of zooming the camera out. Like, I'm also a big believer in like the symbology of numbers, and I'm going to be in comics 10 years next year. More than half of that freelance, and I kind of think that freelance editing forever might be a thing I want to do. Being able to transition to writing is like, that's definitely something I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, as long as I have the opportunity right now and some eyes on me, I might as well, take the leap.
Yeah, and like another thing I imagine is something that comes from your editorial skill set is like, a lot of times I've actually talked to writers who reach out to me because they're like, do you know any artists I can talk to? Like, who how can I find this? But you're somebody who, as part of your job as an editor, I mean, not always, obviously, for like Rick, he's obviously bringing in somebody like Greg Tacchini. If I butchered that, I apologize. Matteo Scalera, Wes Craig, he knows these guys. He actually, did you bring Wes in? I'm trying to remember. No.
Oh, that was, how did Wes come in? Rick sent me some art that Wes was doing at the time for a Batgirl.
Oh, okay.
That Lee Lowridge was coloring, and Lee and Rick are friends.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of just like, hey, this guy looks awesome, and I was like, yeah, holy shit, I've never seen this guy.
So he wasn't somebody he'd worked with; he just was aware of his stuff. But I mean, sorry, go ahead.
No. Either one of them may correct me, but as I recall, Rick reached out to me and was like, hey, this dude got my attention. And I reached out to him, and they just kind of they like cooked up Deadly Class because I think they definitely had a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just like Rick. Honestly, I don't remember. That's crazy. But yeah, no, Wes was I think was a crazy find at the time, because he'd been out there. I actually looked back at it, and he had done an issue of Guardians of the Galaxy at Marvel.
I think he'd done some X-Men stuff too.
Done some X-Men stuff, but it's funny looking back at that style, because now his style is it's such like Deadly Class is like the thing he is known for now.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting to see where that came from. But yeah, no, Rick. I mean, Rick is an artist himself, and now has been a writer of very popular, very prolific, crazily prolific, I should know. And artists just really like working with Rick. I think there's just something about the way he writes and the way he collaborates. So that's definitely someone I learned a lot from, just in terms of like the art side of editing, like how to write for an artist, how to account for an artist's talents and skills, when to just be like, all you, dude, just go forth and make comics. Like there's a confidence that Rick has when he writes, for specific artists, that I think is something that I learned a lot from.
Sure.
Because he just understands their art on their level.
Yeah.
And while I've worked in comics for a long time, and I can talk about art and talk about aspects of the craft, I am not myself an artist in that sense. So always being on, just hearing Rick talk about that is something that I learn a lot from.
Do you think, though, that like I don't know if this was really part of your job at Marvel or at any other point when you're an editor, but I've talked to artists, and like sometimes some people hate this word, but casting books is a thing. Like that's a thing a lot of people have to do. So do you feel like having like that skill in your bag, and like same with Jody? I mean, like, trying to find somebody like Nil Vendrell, who I'd never seen his work before, blew me away. Same with Galad. Galad is basically like my favorite artist that I've discovered this year, and I can't wait till anybody finds or sees his book, because it's so incredible. But I mean, like, those are people that aren't known. I mean, Nil maybe has done stuff that I'm not aware of, but do you feel like that part of the editorial job has come into your favor as a writer at all? Like finding the right fits for these books?
Finding the right fits. I mean, casting, and I agree, it's a terrible word, because it sounds like these preset
It's
slots that you
strange.
just kind of like shove people in. And honestly, when you're at Marvel or DC and you've got, you're editing 20 books and half of them are double shipping and you need to get 5 of them out this week, that's how it's going to be. You're just going to start, carving those things up like shitty Christmas hams and just, I mean, my famously, like I think my record from script to print was 2 weeks, which
Hmm.
is insane. Like, it's just a conga line of pencilers and inkers, and but it got done. I mean, it's an achievement in a on the wrong side of the spectrum, in my opinion.
Hmm.
I tend to veer more on the artistic side of the spectrum, and if it takes a little bit longer, that's fine. Obviously, comics are, a sequential monthly or weekly or daily or what have you, yearly thing, so they need to come out on some time frame. But every now and again, it's nice to challenge yourself. Um, in terms of the casting, I think it just helped when Neil, for example, I'd never seen his art as well, and when Jody and I had written, I think we had written one or two scripts of Shirtless Bear Fighter, and we had been looking for different artists and been interested in it, and did some trial runs and all that stuff. But Neil just kind of jumped out at us, because we had written a couple of scripts, we kind of knew what we were looking for.
Hmm.
We weren't just kind of like generally like, oh, he's got to be able to draw bears and a guy who punches them. But Shirtless Bear Fighter um, is actually like a deceptively tricky book to draw,
Yeah.
because there's definitely a lot of shirtless man action and bear punching and a lot of like, giant bear fights. The book's also pretty funny. Like, there's a lot of just kind of funny moments, and like we tried to like kind of try our hand at comedic timing and like kind of setting up jokes in a comic form, and then nailing, that like kind of punchline delivery, which is tricky. Um, there's there's a lot of dramatic beats there. Like, we kind of poke fun at them, but we also want them to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
So we're always kind of like trying. Turtles is like always running on the two tracks, simultaneously. There's like, it's hilarious and silly, but we also really want to tell a straight story. So we needed an artist who's comfortable with that,
Yeah. It can balance it
and
all out.
yeah, can balance it all out. And there's now scenes in Shirtless that like I just don't even know how someone else would draw them. Like, Neil is just so perfect for them.
Hmm.
At the same time, when I saw Galad's art, when he sent me some ideas and sketches and we started talking, um, his art just spoke to me, like almost like you just said is like your favorite artist that you've just discovered. It was like that for me. I was just like, it's almost like, do you ever smell something that like took you back to when you were a kid?
Oh
Like how
yeah.
a
I
smell can unlock a memory.
I'm gonna go in a very specific direction because I recently had that smell. Alaska has very late summers, and like
Mm-hmm.
there's this like smell that's like it's like when it's like when it's about to rain and it's like
Mm-hmm.
kind of warm out and it's like kind of dusty and everything like that. It reminds me of playing baseball as a kid, and
Oh wow.
every time that comes up, I smell that and I'm like, yes, that's that. So that's kind of, I'm not saying that smells what Galad makes you feel, but there's like a familiarity, like a unconscious familiarity there to some degree.
Yeah. No, I was more thinking like how an extra like another sense can affect
Oh, okay.
unlock a memory, like a smell or a sound, like fresh cut grass. Obviously, there's like an aspect of thinking back to summers and when you were a kid. But it was strange to see that first sequence in Scales that I think it's been previewed. So it's when she's in the bar in the tavern and she's playing like a card game and they
Hmm.
accuse her of cheating, and there's like that was like kind of the basis. That was the pitch pages around which we built that. When I saw those, it immediately just kind of like all my synapses started firing because I got
Hmm.
all of these like rushes ideas at once. I was just like, I understand this world, I understand the tone, I understand the people in this world, like, and it was almost like the world was unfolding in front of me. It was like this is nerdy analogy, but like when you load up Minecraft, you just get dropped into this like field, and then you see the world actually like generating in front of you. Like, it's
Hmm.
already there, but it's just for your younger um, listeners who know the Minecraft. Uh, So it was sort of like that. Like I do genuinely feel like there was just something that clicked, and I was like, wait a second, this is totally the book that we should make, and kind of pitched him on it. And I was like, here's sort of what I'm thinking, seeing your art, and then we kind of took it from there. So casting less because I wasn't like trying to, I didn't have a preconceived notion of what our book should be before I saw pages from Galad.
Right.
We kind of had, he had thought out the scene and painted it more to like kind of solidify his style. And then from those pages on, I started writing like a huge pitch doc that kind of became, the iron that we beat into shape and kind of like forged this, whole world now. Like we have this crazy doc that we just keep adding on to, and every new idea like kind of snakes us in one direction or another. And we don't like take all of them, but it was interesting to work together with an artist for the first time on that, that primordial idea, which spawned everything else.
Yeah.
And I think that my experience as an editor just helped me kind of navigate that maybe a little bit more adeptly or quickly. I don't think that there's, I think that's it. I think it was like the rate and the kind of the that which we came to, kind of a conclusion that this is what we should do. Like this is the voice of the book. This is what the book is about. Here's kind of like a couple of ideas we have, but plenty more, and just to agree on a path that we can then press forward on, so that we could keep things moving. That's definitely something that editing helps you, is that you're always kind of in the back of your mind thinking like, oh, we're on a deadline, even when you're totally. Because we worked on Scales for like 2 year and a half now.
Yeah.
And now we have a deadline. The book's been announced, and but thankfully, like my training as an editor kind of kicked in, and I was very, very quiet about Scales until I actually even asked Image to like give us the time that we need to put this in a spot where we can be what it is.
Right. I mean, and Galad is coloring himself, right?
Yeah, he does everything himself.
Yeah. So I just to clarify, so the day after we're recording this, Shirtless Bear Fighter comes out. That's a miniseries. I'm guessing that's complete, right? You guys are totally done with that?
Shirtless is 5 issues.
Yeah.
It drops tomorrow. That's June 21st. We definitely have room for more on Shirtless.
No, I mean like the 5 issues are done though.
The 5 issues are Neil is drawing the final issue. The fourth, 1, 2, 3 are completely done. Fourth is being colored. Just in case any retailers are listening, like these books are going to ship on time, and we just got comps in for issue 1. It looks great, but that's done. Yeah, I'm writing wise. I'm 100% on Scales right now.
How far are you on Scales? On Scales and Scoundrel, like is Galad past like the first issue? I'm guessing he's way past the first issue, to be honest. But where
next?
Sorry,
tomorrow. What's tomorrow? Wednesday, Thursday. Galad is going to be done with issue 5.
What?
Scales and Scoundrels. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, because I don't even know if whatever. I'll just say it. We're going to go full monthly on Scales. We're not going to take breaks between arcs.
Wow.
Until we absolutely have to. We this is something we set out and talked about very early on, where I kind of explained to him how creator-owned comics kind of tend to work at Image.
Saga schedule. The
saga schedule, exactly, which is something that works very well. A lot of books, retailers have kind of gotten their heads around it. But I was looking at Scales and looking at the kind of looking at each issue, and I was kind of like, I don't want to wait. I wouldn't want to wait if I was a reader between issues. And that's also how I'm writing it. The writing for trade, or writing with the knowledge that there's going to be these long gaps, it does affect how you arc issues, how you arc arcs. I'm really excited about the prospect of someone who picks up Scales #1 and likes it to be able to pick up a new issue every month for a good amount of time. Don't want to overpromise, but I think we're in as healthy a shape in terms of a new launch as I've ever been, involved in on a project.
That's awesome.
So Gilad is really far along. I have to finish script for 6, which is almost done. We've got a lot of cool stuff planned there. But yeah, we specifically set ourselves a pretty high standard, not standard, but like a high goal mark to be in a position where we're not going to have shipping issues on that book for hopefully ever.
Yeah.
Barring catastrophe, we're in very good shape on that book.
That's impressive. Well, I before I get into a direction I want to go in, Shirtless Bear Fighter is really easy to explain. I mean, it's it's about,
is it though?
I mean, it is to a certain degree. I mean, it's like one of the most amazing things about that book, I think, is like when I was at Emerald City when you guys announced it, and I was talking to people at it, and everybody talked about how you guys had the best presentation of anybody who presented, pitched the book at the panel and everything. But everybody was talking about how it's amazing. It's like a book called Shirtless Bear Fighter. Everybody's excited because it's like you kind of feel like you know what you're getting into versus like other titles that are more abstract and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I feel like to a certain degree it's easy to understand. To me, like it's more complicated than that. It actually kind of feels more like Lethal Weapon than what you would expect from, a Shirtless Bear Fighter type title. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, like I feel like Scales and Scoundrels is less easy to explain. So what is your 10,000, what is your elevator pitch for Scales and Scoundrels? How would you describe it?
Damn, I really should have prepped for this.
Oh, my bad.
I should have known you'd ask the one question that,
that everyone is supposed to ask.
Scales and Scoundrels is an all ages, or as I'm trying to make catch on, all readers, because I think that there's certain people think certain things when they hear all ages. Mm-hmm. Think all ages, fantasy adventure comic following the rowdy exploits of treasure hunter Luvander, mm-hmm. who is a young girl with a sneaky secret, and she decides that it sucks being poor and never having any gold coins to toss around. So she decides to plunder this legendary dungeon called Dened Luin, mm-hmm. and at the bottom of which slumbers endless treasure or certain doom, depending on which myth you'd like to believe. But she's a bit of a hothead. She loves adventure. She loves bopping around. She's quick to anger, quick to laugh, all that stuff. On the way there, she meets a couple of other, kind of rogues in the wind. Mm-hmm. This is not an easy pitch. Basically, we wanted to do a fantasy comic that kind of brings the joy back into the genre. I think fantasy has been very popular in the last couple of years with obvious, entries, but it's all very brown and gray.
Very serious.
Very serious. It's like, hey, remember when these things were fun? Yeah, well, fun is for babies. Now it's going to be sad and horrible. And we didn't set out to do this, but I think in the time since we started working on Scales and in the time when it came out, the fantasy genre on TV and the real world kind of switched position, where now like everything is sad and depressing. I don't want to get political about it, but no, it was just kind of in the same way that we talked about earlier, where I was working on a lot of mature readers' books but I like my favorite comics are still the ones I read as a kid, not because I'm putting on rose-tinted glasses, but it's like Asterix and Obelix are unequivocally that's a brilliant comic. Tintin mm-hmm. isn't a brilliant comic. Dragon Ball and Dr. Slump and God knows how many manga that are just, and that's kind of I'm assuming something you wanted to talk about.
Yeah,
is how the Gilad and I are European. I was born in Germany and grew up there, and he's French, and we're both in those markets. American comic books and specifically superhero storytelling is not as dominant. So Scales is definitely something that's not as strongly influenced by kind of an American sensibility for story, or even how I think Americans approach story. in comics, that being, kind of like the 22-page superhero comic.
Can I do a quick elevator pitch just so I
Sure.
can boil it down? This is, you may tell me I'm an idiot for this, but if I was going to tell somebody about it, I'd be like, it's a Final Fantasy comic created by Hayao Miyazaki.
Whoa, I love it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna steal the crap out of that.
I mean, because like the thing is like it's like I mean, did you play Final Fantasy at all?
I don't want anyone to know how much I love 16-bit JRPGs.
Okay, yeah. So
it's
like,
gonna be like, oh, he totally ripped everything off. It was like, no, I don't. I just really love those like rambling adventure stories.
Yeah,
where
I
it's
mean,
like about like, hey, here's a cave. Let's run inside and see what kind of weird monsters at the bottom, and maybe it has a bunch of gold.
Yeah,
because of course they do. And I really, really love those stories. Yeah,
it reminds me. It reminds me of like my favorite part in like pretty much any Final Fantasy game. And I've tried to get this commissioned many times, is like, I love Setzer's airship in Final Fantasy VI.
Oh my god.
Yeah, and like it kind of reminds me of like the vibe you kind of get from that whole sequence where you have, oh god, I forgot the name of the character. The character that pretends to be the opera singer, and it's just like completely ridiculous. And like
Celis?
Yeah, Celis. I was gonna say Celis and I felt wrong. Anyways,
oh
like,
dude,
she gets
let's do a podcast about how amazing that game is.
It's so good.
How good that story is.
Locke maintains his position as my favorite character in the history of fiction. I have no idea why.
Locke's origin is so good.
He's so good.
Oh my god.
He's so good. Anyway, so like it really reminds me of like that section of like Final Fantasy, kind of like the fun, not like the really dark stuff like in Final Fantasy 4 when they go to the moon and fight the dude and everything like that, but like Final Fantasy 6 stuff where it's just kind of fun and everybody's hanging out and everything, and like done in like a kind of a Miyazaki type style, because that's the thing I love about Galad's art, is Galad's art feels so like alive and so lived in, and it feels so like, I don't know, I mean it's hard to really explain, but it kind of reminds me of kind of like the vibe I get from Miyazaki type stories. Anyways, so that's my pitch. Go with Final Fantasy as done by Hayao Miyazaki.
I love it. I'm straight up gonna snap that up.
All right, well, good.
Yeah, no, that is as good a pitch. See, now though, your Final Fantasy memories are like of when Final Fantasy was good. Now it's just like a boy band driving around the desert.
I stopped at 9.
Oh, 9 is the good one. You should. That's a good one. That was sorry, this is like turning into a. I'm exposing way more of my nerdy side than I intended to.
Oh man, Final Fantasy is like the peak of my nerdiness. Like if I could just play 4 and 6, and this is where you're gonna hang up. I actually like Final Fantasy 8 more than I like 7. But was that a bad sound?
No, not at all. I have equal issues with 7 and 8, but for different reasons.
Yeah, I was more of a Super Nintendo guy. 6 is my favorite.
6 is my favorite too. 6 is like hands down a good story.
Yeah,
which is almost impossible. There's like 3 JRPGs that have good stories.
But I actually kind of feel like that influence, I'm surprised I don't see that more, given the fact that like there are so many people who were growing up in the 90s who were reading comics but also playing like Super Nintendo Final Fantasy games. And I don't really feel like I kind of see those stories in comics. So like getting into Skills and Scoundrels for me was like, and this is going to sound super cheesy, and you're going to be like, oh, I can't believe you said that. It's like going home for me as a reader. I felt like it was a really...
Oh, dude. Welcome, like... get a co-writing chair. Like that's what it feels like for me.
Yeah,
it genuinely feels like when I saw Galad's art, like he just unlocked these portions of me that if for whatever reason I've like just poured cement on, and I was just like, wait a second, this used to make me really happy,
right?
Like maybe I can use this to make other people feel happy. And it's pretty crazy because yeah, like you said, like those games were really popular. That sense of like being a 90s kid, I think that there's some, you don't want to get too weird about that, but like there's a sense of innocence about it. Obviously, then I bring like a sense of like, yeah, but that's only interesting if it's challenged somehow. So there is a lot. That's kind of like the soil out of which this whole story grew. And that's when I pitched Galad on like kind of like a, like, hey dude, here's what your art is inspiring in me. here's kind of a story, or not even a story, like a plot, but kind of just like a general world sense and scale.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just like, that sounds amazing. That's exactly what I want to draw. And I was like, great, let's get to work.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of like unlock these things in each other.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's super, super great. Like it's one of the like highest highs in creating that I've ever been on. But I agree with you. Like his art, there's something like deeply comforting about it.
I was just gonna say, so you started touching on this. I wanted to go back to, you're a person that's known for editing like Black Science, Deadly Class, Southern Bastards, like pretty hard boiled stories for the most part. I know you love Garth Ennis and Berserk, though. Like those are two of your favorite things.
Mm-hmm.
And all ages or all readers, which I actually agree with. I actually wrote an article a few years ago about the awkwardness of the phrase "all ages."
Mm-hmm.
Fantasy adventure that's not what I'd expect from you. What made Skills and Scoundrels a story you really wanted to tell?
I think it was the challenge. First of all, like being presented with an artist whose style I both deeply spoke to me and really, really loved. But I wasn't going to pitch Galad on like, my ultra violent Game of Thrones knockoff. Like I'll do my homage to Berserk one day and
Right.
it'll be glorious, but talk about casting, like you kind of got to know what you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I started thinking about the loose concept again and the characters, I think it was just I was in a spot, it was the right place at the right time. But I was just thinking back to the kind of comics I grew up reading, and I remember my dad really loving them as well, and he would always laugh at different parts, like in an Asterix comic. He wasn't so wild about Tintin, as I recall, but one of the first comics I ever read that he gave me his old version, like when he was a kid, was Prince Valiant. It's Hal Foster's Prince Valiant.
Mm-hmm.
And that is also just like a brilliant, sweeping epic and beautiful, beautiful art. And I think I kind of started thinking about a story in those terms. It's like, oh, well, wait a second. Like, there's obviously comics that can be read by everyone, or at the very least by, an 8-year-old boy and his 40-something-year-old father.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Galad's art style is that, like, it's something that can be universally understood. It's something that just like exudes a warmth and an impact and just a feel good. Like when we started Instagramming pics of it, someone just said like that's just eye candy,
Mm-hmm.
which this was a lovely word. And then I started thinking, like you said, like obviously Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli films are a huge inspiration for. I mean, it's like when people say, "Oh, I think Mobius. I love Mobius." It's like, yeah, of course you do because it's Mobius. So I was like, oh, I like Studio Ghibli movies. It's like, yeah, you do because you have a soul. Like that's kind of how that works. But how brilliantly those films also approach that twin narrative of something for kids.
Right.
Like kids watch Totoro and are like gleeful and clapping and see giant cat, and grown-ups watch Totoro and like burst into tears because it is a devastatingly like sad movie. Same for like Porco Rosso, which was like my secret favorite Miyazaki movie. It's all about, oh, it's a pig flying a plane and there's funny stuff in it. It's like all about like the horrors of war and great stuff. So I started thinking about that. Pixar movies are the same, obviously. Yep. I mean, there's a very keep kind of bringing those two up, aiming very high in terms of what we're trying to achieve, because those two are pretty damn high. But just as a challenge, being like, I don't want us to fall back on like just kind of lazy violence or profanity or just like gross or excessive or exploitative situations, because that's not the book I want.
Mm-hmm.
Or we want. I want to tell stories that actually like don't turn people off, like don't give them a reason to put it down.
Right.
We're not gonna shy away. I keep saying I, but I obviously mean us, the creative team. It's a writer's fault. We are really setting out to kind of pull people into this world, have it really be a place that they want to get lost in, have these characters be like friends or, people they want to know more about. And some of these characters might be like, oh yeah, absolutely, I'll tell you all you want to know about me. And others might be like a little, standoffish and brusque, but just like get this to be a comic. And again, why that monthly thing is so important to me, that becomes a staple, in a reader's life, where they really can't wait for that next issue. Where are we going to take them? What are they going to see there? Is it going to be fun? Is it going to be exciting? Is it going to be a little scary? And again, like, as we decided that is the route that we wanted to take, and the like super cold clinical mercenary part of my brain was like, yeah, all ages comics, nobody does those anymore. Like, maybe it's time for one.
Right.
But for the most part, it just felt so right. I was just like, this is exactly the kind of comic I want to write right now. It's something that I've felt hasn't been done for too long. It's honestly sort of what I feel superhero comics should be doing and aren't. And I was a part of that because I was editing, like Max comics and stuff like that.
Right.
But I've always kind of been this weirdo where I'm just kind of like, I really like superhero comics that are really weird and super horrible and depressing. But I also feel sad that we don't have like Silver Age Superman comics where he's like on the cover saying like, oh, I have to eat all these pancakes or the world will explode.
Flapjacks.
That's right. Oh, damn. I just made my own character mad at me. So yeah, it was it really only works when I like talk about it in the context of like me speaking with Gilad and us, the two of us kind of just like putting our brains together and realizing how much we had in common and how similar our tastes were and how similar kind of our hopes were, like what we wanted comics to be, what we haven't really been seeing as of late. And then using, what we both brought to the table to try and make that happen. Like in a very simple way, it's as an origin story as much as any other comic, where you just a writer and an artist or two creators get together and are just kind of like, we think this should be a thing. Let's make this.
I do think that you actually brought up something that I think about a lot, and it's that I feel like too many comics kind of live in like a middle ground where they're not really like, they're trying to appeal to like everyone to a degree, but they're not really appealing to anyone in the process. And it's like comics like Skills and Scoundrels or like Bone, like scratch one itch for me. And then comics like, Punisher Max or like, or I don't know, I'm trying to think of another comic that's really hardcore that let's just say like Uncanny X-Force. That's something that Jody worked on. And,
absolutely.
And like, that's a book that is absolutely amazing. And it's like deep rooted into continuity. It's pretty hardcore. It's got a pretty dark storyline, but I mean, like those two spectrums, like they kind of hit really hard with me because they're really accomplishing a vision that speaks to a specific direction as opposed to is trying to exist in that middle ground. And I think there's a lot more value in kind of avoiding that middle ground as a storyteller and trying to actually say something of value. I know that's kind of like a negative statement about a lot of comics, but I think it's accomplishable. I just feel like a lot of comics don't really aim for that.
I mean, yeah, it's a very good point. First of all, I agree with you. I think Uncanny X-Force, that was Rick Remender and Jerome Pena, Dean White, Jody LaHoop editing, is, as far as that kind of comic goes, I think is like one of the pinnacles of the last 20 years.
Absolutely.
It was, like you said, it was rooted in continuity. It was basically like the best version of the kind of comic that has, become like kind of the superhero comic of the last 20 years. Having been there when that comic was made and then having seen the result, I was just like, oh yeah, like you don't like a classic doesn't come out and then like the next year someone like tops it. Like usually a classic stays a classic for a long time. And having been out of superhero comics for some time now, I couldn't be sure, but I'm pretty certain in terms of like all around kind of packaged, Uncanny X-Force has not been topped yet. But what's strange is that I really tried to not think about other comics too much when Gilad and I were talking. I wasn't trying to find a niche and then fill it. I wasn't looking at like the previews catalog and being like, how can we create a crack in here and fill it with, with our comic. I was, and it's always, it's almost like a risk. I was just like, I'm just going to make the comic that I want to read.
Yeah.
Or kind of the comic I need to write right now and I want to see come together. And it was through the collaboration with Gilad that I got, the confidence, and both of us were kind of like pushing each other for new things. And we just discovered that we worked really well together. Mm-hmm. And what we ended up with was something that like is very, very uniquely us. And, but I still had no idea whether or not, like when we pitched it, I was like, I think this is good. I have no idea if anyone wants to read this.
Right.
Which is crazy because my whole job as an editor is to be like, I think someone wants to read this. But the second you switch that hat, you're like, I have no idea. It's just like taking off glasses after you've been wearing them all day. You can't see anything. So
yeah, as an editor, you have some distance from it, so you can like have some level of objectivity.
Exactly.
But as a writer, you're talking about your baby, and it's kind of hard to separate that.
Yeah.
I actually think it's one thing I wanted to ask about though is like I read for like Shirtless Bear Fighter, when it came to like scripting, you and Jody were really pretty robust and tight with how you approach scripts for Neil. But it sounds like you're kind of the opposite of that with Gilad. Like maybe you're not quite writing down Dread on Bike, but but you're like, are you kind of going a lot leaner with that than you were, on Shirtless?
I think the scripts definitely are leaner in general than on Shirtless. That's not necessarily like a style thing. Jody's personal style and my personal style are also tend to be try to trim as much fat as you can.
Sure. You are
give
editors.
Yeah, exactly. Like just no one. It's not prose. Like no one's going to read these scripts except for the artist.
Right.
But there are situations in Shirtless, like I spoke of, where it's like a really funny setup, and we kind of have to explain the joke to Neil, who is brilliant, but he lives in Barcelona, so English is his first language. So we kind of wanted to be sure at the start that he kind of gets it, and then there might be some email exchanges. But for the most part, like a lot of that kind of hard work was done at the layout stage, where we like kind of like work with a little bit of visual reference and stuff like that. But that very quickly we just like discovered that Neil's just a genius. Like he'll just take something where we were just like breaking our backs to explain it, because it's just like one specific, like hand gesture or like something that really we needed it to sell a joke that we both like really loved. And Neil would just like, just like nuke it.
Right.
With Scales, Gilad and I, once we had, kind of decided that we wanted to do this big fantasy world, this kind of ever expanding space. But the first adventure, kind of the first time you meet this character and the story that starts in issue 1 is a more contained one. It's them going on one adventure, one quest in a kind of encapsulated, very large expanding space. But it's like they're underground. They're in this weird dungeon that's been there for like hundreds of generations, and no one knows what's at the bottom anymore. There's all these layers in it, and there's different, like civilizations that have lived in it, and it's just like this really weird, exciting, like adventure box. And we kind of did that so that we could get a grip of the characters, and also later, like 3 or 4 scripts in, I actually discovered that like this gave me a great opportunity to learn how to write this book. And it is, the first draft is always a little fat, and then I can take a ton of stuff out because I know how to write the characters now. Like they speak to me and like know the language and how they all talk to each other. And Gilad is just so good that I like have his art in my head now. Like there's scenes in the first 2 or 3 scripts that I wrote a little bit fatter, but I actually reread them later and were like, oh, those were still unclear. But he like it's almost like he read my mind. Like he knew exactly what I was talking about.
That's the dream.
Like, yeah, I know. It's absolutely insane. And I was like, I want to like chain myself to his leg or something. I don't, because he deserves a life without me chained to his leg. But realizing that, it's like relationship to an artist can, it evolves. So now I'm actually like, I'm writing even less. I feel, ask him and he'll tell you like, no, these scripts are just too much crap here. But ultimately, I try to give him everything he needs. There was one instance where we were having a little bit of trouble with one specific panel. I was kind of harping on. I had a certain image in my head and I wasn't quite getting it right. And then he was just like, hey, I went back and I reread the script, kind of as inspiration. And there was like one thing you wrote that actually really triggered it. And that was actually a detail that I could have deleted, but didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So then I kind of got the opposite end where I was like, maybe, again, there's constantly a balance. I definitely don't try to load the artist down in general. I don't want to be a writer who can only write for one artist. But for the most part, I'm kind of trying to convey what the character is thinking and saying and why they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And Galata is just like all the background stuff and just the details he puts in. And like one day I opened my email and he's like, hey, I went back and like redid this whole scene overnight. And I was like, holy crap. Like it's absolutely fantastic to work with someone like him.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I have a few things that I want to go through really quick. We've kind of reached where I was trying to go, but I want to touch on some like small things before we close. Normally I finish with like 5 questions about you. Instead, I'm going to finish with like a bunch of random stuff about the books you're working on. So for Shirtless Bear Fighter, I read in an interview that the phrase Shirtless Bear Fighter came when you and Jody were watching a cheesy action flick over cheap beer. I have to know what that movie was. Do you remember?
No. Neither of us do. I know, man. I want to know what that situation was. I want to see that dude.
I really feel like it reminds me of Bennett from Commando, except for he wore chainmail, so obviously he's out.
Dude, Bennett is I love watching Commando with Jody because he's just like, he's so right. Jody was just like, the whole movie is just like about how chiseled Arnold is.
And how like kind of out of shape Bennett is. Yeah,
Bennett is like kind of fat and shitty like dumpy looking, and he's wearing chainmail. You're just like, that dude is not a threat at all. In no world is that man a threat.
I've always wondered if like he was supposed to be chiseled, but he came onto the set and they're like, just give him some chainmail so nobody notices how out of shape this guy is.
Well, they're like, you were in better shape in the Road Warrior. And he was like, yeah, well, that was 7 years ago.
Yeah.
Had a lot.
I had to ask. Well, on top of that, are you an 80s action movie fan, or is that just like something you and Jody kind of bonded over?
Oh, no. Like, hit me up. I'm all over that stuff.
Okay. I do want to say that like the 80s action flick, I know that's not like the only vibe you guys are going for in Shirtless Bear Fighter, but it's one that speaks very heavily to me, especially with like Agent Burke's dialogue. It really reminds me. Did you ever watch Parks and Rec at all?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. It kind of reminds me of like what Burt Macklin would say. And and so I really love that. And also Brother Bear kind of looks like a villain from like Bloodsport if he was a bear.
Yes.
So it's pretty perfect for me. I love 80s action movies and just
Bear Sport.
Bear Sport. Ooh, that's good. I have to admit that
writing us down.
The title Kung Fury kind of came into my head, but that's too obvious. So another thing I wanted to bring up, when I was researching this, I was re-listening to the podcast we did last time, and we actually talked for a fair bit about Naked Wolverine. And is this kind of your version of doing a Naked Wolverine comic?
I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, Jody and I talked a fair bit about the double standard of nudeness in comics.
Oh, sure.
We're both straight guys, but I think we're both like, just there's something. It's comics, it's art. Like, we want to see the human figure, and it's not just like, broke back, buxom, like comic chicks. Like, I think it's really awesome to just see like a bunch of dudes. But dude, like manga has a whole genre for it. It's like the flesh bomb, like. Mm-hmm. What Fist of the North Star, like all these hyper muscly dudes. You look at books like Baki the Grappler or Ashita no Joe or The Fighting. Like there's a real celebration of just like crazy muscles and dudes like sweating and beating on each other.
Right.
So I definitely like when we came up with Shirtless, or kind of the period in which we birthed that particular hairy naked Venus from our heads. Jody had left Valiant. I had been out of Marvel for some time, so we were both freelancing. We were both kind of bopping around, and we had a lot of creative energy that we didn't really know where to put. And we saw this movie or whatever it was, and then decided to. So one of us said like, "Oh, that dude looks like a shirtless bear fighter, probably in like a beer haze." And then a couple of weeks later, like Jody came to me or we talked, and we were like, "That title's really awesome. We should do something." And I'm pretty sure like our desire to just kind of have a burly naked dude, run around punching bears in the forest in some way, could be traced back to the kind of comics we wanted to, but not even the kind of comics we wanted to do, but the kind of that like ridiculousness. Like how serious superhero comics are, and all these dudes are like these barrel chested, like just six-pack abs, like all superheroes, like even the ones that wouldn't work. Like, why does Cyclops have like six-pack abs? Like
Right.
he shoots lasers or whatever he shoots from his eyes. Like
The optic blasts come from the core, man.
Yeah.
It's a really tight core. It's important.
Yeah, like if you had super strength like Colossus and you couldn't be hurt, why are you working out?
Right.
Like wouldn't like an out of shape Colossus be like funnier and more endearing somehow?
The chromium, like the body would be really weird, but I'd read it. That sounds awesome.
I think that'd be great. Like he just like busts out of his costume, or like, and that's just for dudes. Like don't get me started about like, like female comic book characters. Like there's a reason Faith is just like, hey, here's a lady who's not, an hourglass figure and wears like pumps. And it's just, I mean, it's a very simple, it's not like changing that changes inherent inequalities in comics, or the industry, but it's just like being visual and representing, in characters is important. Like these things are seen. And as such, I think demystifying the male form.
You certainly do that at length, so to speak.
Oh man, I was just at Heroes Con where we had a Heroes Con exclusive Shirtless Bear Fighter 1 variant. We broke the street date by a couple of days. Didn't have a lot, but we sold them all. And there was this one guy who came by with his kid, and he started flipping through it. And he was like, "Oh, is this for kids?" And I was like, "Not exactly." And of course, he flips right to the page in question, where the first time you see Shirtless, you see him in all his glory. Of course, it's pixelated, but we put some tricks on there, and the kid just starts cracking up, which I thought was great.
Yeah.
Like it's just funny to kids, you know? Kids don't care. They're just like, oh, there's a naked dude, and there's like he flips to another page and it's just like Shirtless, like his hairy butt.
I kind of feel like it's not for kids. I mean, like I feel
not for kids. It's not super violent, and there's no cussing, and
it's dixelated. I love that you guys invented a phrase for that. That's great.
It's dixelation. That's one of Jody's finest hours, dixelation.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, like it's a really heartening story. It's about a man who has to learn how to control his anger, to control the things he loves. It's about family. It's about kind of, retracing the steps of your path and seeing where you went wrong.
He's got a bear jet.
He's got a bear jet, bear house, got all flapjacks. Loves his flapjacks.
He takes maple syrup like most people test cocaine, which is always great.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm like going, oh my god. I'm like, oh my god, our idea is so great, but like that still cracks me up.
Oh god, that was the funniest part of the whole first issue for me.
They bribe him flapjacks and maple syrup, and he rubs the maple syrup on his gums like 80s dudes test cocaine. And it's just like, has anyone ever tested cocaine that way? Like you just rub it on your gums. It's like, oh, it's good. Like, but I have a chemistry set here. We could just test it right now.
It's how we accept that people test cocaine, though, and that's all that matters. All right, so I'm going to go into a couple more questions. I have to ask, it's a insane comic, called Shirtless Bear Fighter, but the first issue has a cover from Andrew Robinson, who I think most people would agree is one of on the short list for the best artists in comics. And
Absolutely.
on that short list also is Paolo Rivera, who, in my opinion, has done the greatest comic in the last or the greatest cover in the last couple of years with his, cover to the second issue, which is unbelievable. And I will post with this. How did that happen? Did you just say, hey, you guys want to do this? Or what was the deal with that? It just seems like an amazing pairing of talent and title.
So the Paolo Rivera cover is actually for Shirtless Bear Fighter 4.
Oh, 4. My bad.
Yeah, no worries. We have a lot of covers for Shirtless with a lot of talented artists. Like, I genuinely love all of our covers and everyone who worked on them. Paolo's cover is very special. Mm-hmm. Jody and I, like many, internet savvy comic book lovers, are big fans of those old Men's Adventure magazine covers that were always like Men's Health, Men's Adventure. And they very often featured like some shirtless dude like wailing on beavers or being attacked by like otters or it's always some stupid animal. Like every now and again it would be a cougar, but they would run out of like really dangerous animals because they did so many of these magazines, and they'd like have the guy attacked by like wombats or something. And then they had all these different, it was always something sexy. It was always something like, I went to the island of lesbians. Okay. And, a question mark and something like that. So those are really exciting and silly and stupid and just always full of joy. So at some point we were like, we need to do one of these for Shirtless. Like, it's just too perfect. Mm-hmm. And it might be a little niche, and it might be a little like only a handful of people will get it. But, it's fun and we like it. And for the most part, that's enough for us to kind of try to make something happen. And so we thought about who could do it. And we're always like, well, it should be painted. Who are the painters that can do that kind of style? It's very specific. Paolo Rivera is just one of the most, just multi-talented and prolific artists we have. And I think Jody had worked with him. So we had a direct line basically. So we just reached out. And I think the way Jody told it, he was just like, Paolo was like, like his desktop screensaver, were those old men's, like, it was a cover.
Nice.
He loves it so much. Like, we basically asked like the perfect guy to do the perfect cover. He was like, I need to do this right now. And we were so excited, and we sent him the issues, and he chose a very specific, the image he chose for that cover. Where Shirtless is like, he's got the like classic GI helmet because he's a Nam, and these two pandas are like coming at him. One of the pandas has a knife, which is also really great. And he chose that. It was brilliant. And he sends us a JPEG, and it's the cover. And we were like, hey, this looks great. Cracked up, and we were like, yeah, just send us the high res. And he was like, oh no, this is just the digital like sketch. Like, I still have to paint the cover. Like, what the like, it is genuinely, I think, one of the best covers of my career, if not the best cover I've seen in forever. That would 100% red-blooded passion is in that cover.
I would 100% buy, like, do you know those like Brubaker and Phillips like magazine variants that they've done in the past?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I know that they like it ended up saying that they're not going to do them anymore because retailers kind of hate them because they are an awkward size. But I would totally buy one of those, and I have to say his like the beard he did is just like 12 out of 10 amazing.
Dude, the beard is the best part. I've been sitting. I mean, full disclosure, we made some prints for Heroes Con. It was just too good. Like, when we announced that cover, like, that shit went viral.
It was number one on Reddit, like, immediately. Like, for the comic book one. That's amazing.
Like, for a ton of people that we met at the con, they all told us like that cover was what kind of set them off. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the first time they heard about Shirtless Bear Fighter was that cover. So we luckily preempted that, and we're like, we should have this cover represented, at the convention when we come out. Little marketing tip for anyone who wants to break in, like, go where your readers are. But I stared at that cover for so long, and I still love it. I would stare at it for like 3 more days. Mm-hmm. The beard, the way he took that cartoony beard, because it's like all round. Mm-hmm. It's so voluminous. Like, I just want to run my fingers through his beard, which would like totally piss him off. But there's also, to savvy people, he's got a hip bone that's like the sexiest hip bone. It's just like he just shaded it just right. This little reflection. It like definitely curves down to his like area, but it's like you're like, yeah, there's abs there, but he's not like, it's not like shitty steroid abs. It's like that dude just did a lot of crunches, in the woods, like with rocks and shit. Like it's so shirtless. Like it's just exactly the right thing.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing.
It's not this like beautiful, perfect superhero body. It's like a dude who eats a bunch of flapjacks and then just like works it off
and lives in the woods and just kind of has the body that goes with it.
Yeah.
All right, so I only have two more things for you. This is something I just came across last night as I was researching. You guys made a mobile game for Shirtless Bear Fighter, which I honestly thought was a joke when I first saw it, and then I ended up playing it for like 15 minutes.
Yes.
I love old school side scrollers. It was kind of like I don't know, like Final Fight or like the X-Men arcade game and everything like that. And it's awesome. How did that happen? Like, why was that a thing you guys decided to do? Because I think it's amazing promotion.
How did that come about? So that game, Jody came up to me and was like, "Hey, check this out." And I remember I'd seen it. It was a couple of years ago, 2013. A British game designer called Nicole Hunt made a game called Fists of Awesome, which, in certain regards, had a lot of tonal similarities with the comic, with Shirtless. Neither Jody and I were, aware of it at the time, but it had come out and had been, done very successful. It was this like fun retro game about a lumberjack who like travels through time and beats the crap out of forest animals.
Amazing.
Which is awesome. So we decided to reach out, tentatively and be like, the game had been out for a while. So we figured, honestly, we didn't know. We didn't know how much work would have to go into something like that. We just wanted to make him aware of it because we really thought like, oh, here's a kindred spirit potentially. And luckily, again, we like hit the right guy at the right time, and he like totally went for it. He was like, I love this comic, and this is really fun. Made me laugh out loud, and he put some work in, and he very kindly and incredibly talentedly like retooled 2 levels and put together a little package of all the assets that the game already had, and the great thing it was that the system was already in place. So you can just go to I think we tweeted the link out and it's on Instagram. Go to
I'll put it on here too.
Yeah, you should put it on there, and people can just don't have to download anything. It's HTML5, so you can just go to the site and play a game, and you just run out of a burning bear house and you beat the crap out of some bears, and it's really, really fun.
It is really fun.
Perfect for a long commute or just a lunch break. See if you can get to the end. Which I can't. I like get my ass kicked all the time, which is crazy because I love those games. But I'm just always like, man.
My greatest discovery was finding out that the boss bear in the first level could actually punch the other bears. So you just have to kind of goad them into it.
Oh, really? You like get into it?
Yeah, exactly.
That's so Brother Bear. He would totally go through another bear to get to Shirtless.
Exactly. So the last question is, and it's a lot more serious, but in your initial interview with Paste about Shirtless Bear Fighter, you said Shirtless Bear Fighter saved comics for you, and I kind of get the vibe for for Scales and Scoundrels too. Why was that? Like, what was it about these books that kind of helped you? I don't know, not rediscover your love of the medium, but like. Why did you say that, I guess?
I think the circumstances under which Shirtless came together was, like I said, Jody and I had met at Marvel. We both worked there for several years. We both put out some pretty good work there. For both of us, it didn't work out for one reason or another, and we kind of parted ways with a place that we had, in some maybe in naivete or maybe just in not being weathered enough, had put a lot of hope into, and that's something that and kind of like comic book people who want to make comics, like, we're pretty passionate about it. Like, there's no other reason to be. It's not an industry that makes you very rich or very famous, with certain exceptions, but that doesn't deter you. Like, I still moved across an ocean at the drop of a hat try and make some comics and learn how to edit. So I think we'd both, and also beyond that, it's just like a crazy, exhausting job. Like we both worked really long hours. We were roommates. It was one like legendarily hot and terrible summer where we were living in this crap apartment that got this like insane bed bug like just attack. Like I just still get hives just thinking about it. So we'd been through some things as friends and as colleagues, and now we were all of a sudden in a situation where we had worked on comics really, really hard for quite some years, young years, mid-20s, like you're working hard all the time, but it just wasn't what we had gotten. Like we both felt independently from one another that we'd gotten pretty far from why we had set out to do this in the first place. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to kind of bring it back. And we felt like at the time, like we still have enough of a name recognition, not like anyone would buy a comic based on these two editors writing it, but at the time we were like, we could still get something done,
right?
Like this could be a last hurrah. And that honestly, that's to this until recently, like I still genuinely thought that Shirtless was going to be like my swan song in comics. Mm-hmm. It would be this one thing that I do and then just like peace out. I tried, didn't work out for whatever reason, and I'm out. And now, 5 years later, I'm here and talking and still editing a bunch and writing another book. And yeah, but like we really, with that in mind, tried to craft Shirtless as something that contained everything we loved about comics. Not like that we just love comics about angry dudes who fight bears, but like the vessel of it.
Right.
It's something very silly. It's something very funny and joyful, that on a like drop of a hat turns into something, pretty serious and pretty, something where we're talking a little bit about ourselves, and it's slightly autobiographical, potentially, stuff like that, where a comic is just the perfect medium to have all those different layers and all those different dimensions to a story, where, I mean, maybe there'll be a Shirtless Bear Fighter movie, but I really hope that, I want to know which director is going to get those tones just right.
Right.
Maybe it can be done, but then that's a filmmaker's, a challenge to try to do that. But we were comic book makers, and in the same vein with Scales, I think it was just that it came around at just the right time for me to write something like that, where I was further along in my personal life, in my professional life, where I was starting to think about the future with my then girlfriend, now fiance. My nephew was born in the meantime, and you kind of start just getting old and thinking a little bit more about like things outside of your own perception. Mm-hmm. And it was just something where I felt like a lot of the comics I was making weren't comics that I could give to anyone.
Right.
I could give to certain people, and I would, wholeheartedly recommend the books I work on to certain people. But honestly, most of the people I know are comic book people, comic book makers, or in some way involved in that. And I think that there was also an aspect of starting to be a writer. I should start trying to write something that appeals to a lot of people, and then potentially write something that specializes for certain people, like if I want to write a comic for, burgeoning superhero crime scene or genre stuff. I think I could do that as well. Right now, it's more challenging to me to write something that I don't really know how to write or haven't edited either. To just not have those guide rails, to just kind of kick those away and launch myself into a new adventure, which is also sort of what the book is about. So it fit really well,
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for everybody to read it. Both books are fantastic. If you guys haven't had the chance yet, go pick up Shirtless Bear Fighter, and Scales and Scoundrels has come out September 6th.
Correct.
Yes.
Yep.
It is going to be awesome. Thank you so much for coming on to chat with me, Sebastian. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Awesome. Thank you, man.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer and editor Sebastian Girner. You can find him on Twitter at @sgirner. He's writing in the new Image series Shirtless Bear Fighter and the upcoming Scales and Scoundrels, as well as his editing in books like Southern Bastards and Deadly Class. If you're a fan of the show, there's some big news. Off Panel now has a Patreon. If you like the show and want to support it, consider backing on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. There are fun rewards and insider information you can get if you do. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Maxwell Schmidt, Dan Lee, Kat McKenzie, Lou Iovino, Christopher Carter, Nicholas Kesslake, Brian Dickerson, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mail, Adam Highfill, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Johan Brander, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Cabinet, Matt Pataglia, Alec Bernal, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. Don't forget to like the show on Facebook at /sketch, that's SKTCHD, follow on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Want more from Off Panel? Subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from the album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.